Have you ever sat quietly and wondered when everything started to change between you and your children? One moment, they're small, tugging at your sleeve for attention, needing you for everything. Then, without warning, the house gets quieter, phone calls get shorter, the visits fewer and farther between, and one day, you sit at the kitchen table, tea cooling beside you, and you ask yourself, when did I become invisible? It's not just about growing older. It's about feeling like your role has slipped away silently, like a book slowly being closed while you're still mid-sentence. And you wonder, do they still see me? Not as a chore, not as someone to check in on out of duty, but as a person with thoughts, with worth, with stories still waiting to be heard. If that speaks to something you've felt lately, please know this, you're not alone. And more importantly, it's not too late. There are ways, quiet and powerful ways, to rekindle the light that once glowed so steadily in your heart. Not by trying to go back to the past, but by stepping into this season of life with dignity, clarity, and meaning. Let me tell you about Helen. She's 72, widowed 8 years ago. Her daughter lives 3 states away, and her son, though just across town, rarely visits. For a long time, Helen waited. Waited by the phone, waited by the window. She told herself not to be a burden, to be patient, to understand that they're busy. But as the months passed, the silence wrapped around her like fog. She stopped planting flowers in spring, stopped baking cookies for the grandkids who never seemed to stop by anymore. The sparkle in her laugh dimmed. One evening, after missing her granddaughter's birthday party for the 3rd year in a row, Helen sat down and whispered something aloud she'd never dared to say before. I feel forgotten. And that truth hit her harder than she expected, because it wasn't just about her children. It was about what she believed about herself, that she no longer mattered, that the best parts of her had already passed. But something surprising happened that night. The silence was so deep, so complete, that she finally heard her own voice again. Not the voice shaped by guilt or fear, but the quiet voice underneath the one that said, I'm still here. I still have something to give. Even if no one asks for it. That was the moment something shifted. Helen didn't suddenly get more visits or longer phone calls, but she started doing one simple thing that changed everything. She began choosing herself. She woke up the next morning and made her favorite breakfast. Not because anyone was coming over, but because she was worth a hot breakfast. She opened her closet and pulled out the scarf she used to save for special occasions. She wore it to the park and smiled at a stranger. Then she signed up for a local painting class, something she'd always told herself she'd do someday. The first time she dipped her brush into the blues and golds, she felt something stir in her chest. She hadn't felt in years, joy that came from within. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's sacred. It's the first quiet step in telling the world, I matter. And here's the most beautiful part. When you begin to live like you matter, other people start to notice too. This brings me to something many of us forget in our later years. We don't need to wait for someone to give us permission to live fully again. We don't need our children's approval to be vibrant, curious, or joyful. We are allowed to enjoy ourselves simply because we're here. Frank, a retired history teacher, used to feel bitter every Father's Day when none of his 3 kids called. He'd sit by the phone, heart tight, wondering what he did wrong. He replayed conversations from decades ago, picking apart words like bones, trying to find the moment he lost their closeness. But then one Sunday morning, he decided to go out for a walk instead of waiting. He passed a young couple in the park, their toddler giggling in a stroller. The mother looked exhausted, juggling snacks and sippy cups. Frank gave her a kind smile and said, "You're doing a great job." She blinked, then smiled back, like someone finally saw her. That tiny exchange cracked something open in him. He didn't need to relive old wounds. He could still offer something gentle and valuable to the world. Not as a forgotten father, but as a present human being. There is deep power in deciding that your worth isn't measured by who calls you, who visits, or who remembers. It is measured by how you carry yourself, how you speak to yourself when no one else is listening. Start by honoring your mornings. Even if the day ahead is quiet, make the first hour beautiful. Play music, open the curtains, water the plants, Light a candle. If it helps you remember that your presence is still sacred, and then try reaching outward, not in desperation, but in quiet confidence. Write a letter, not asking for attention, but offering a memory or a blessing. People are drawn to energy that is calm, grounded, and self-assured. That's what makes your presence meaningful, not just to others, but to yourself. Helen's children eventually did call more often, not because she begged them to, but because when they did finally visit, they saw something glowing in her they hadn't noticed before. Not neediness, not guilt, but a quiet joy that made them want to stay longer. Listen deeper. You don't have to demand to be seen, but you can make yourself visible by stepping into your life again, moment by moment, breath by breath. Not for them, for you. And when you do, something begins to change. Somewhere between the routines of the day and the long, quiet evenings, there's often a subtle ache that many don't talk about. It's not just the silence itself, but what it whispers. That maybe your best years are behind you. That perhaps you've already given your greatest love, your strongest care, your kindest years, and now you're just waiting. But what if I told you that this part of your life isn't a waiting room? It's not the leftover, it's not the epilogue. It's the chapter where you finally stop living for everyone else and start discovering the quiet treasure of living for you. Of course, it doesn't feel that easy, especially if, like many, you spent decades giving without always receiving. For many seniors, that giving wasn't just a gesture, it was a pattern, a deeply ingrained way of being. You were the one who stayed up when someone else was sick, who listened, even when no one asked how you were doing. You gave time, money, advice, forgiveness, even when it wasn't returned. And for a while, maybe that was okay. Love, after all, is generous. It doesn't keep score. But now, you've noticed something, that the more you give without pause, the more people come to expect it, not with malice, not even with awareness, but slowly, without realizing, they start to believe that your love will always stretch, always bend, always accommodate no matter what. It's a quiet kind of erosion, the kind that doesn't break you all at once, but wears you down like waves against a stone. That's what happened to Margaret. She's 68, has 3 children, all grown with families of their own. She spent her entire life putting them first. When her youngest went through a divorce, she opened her doors and gave up her guest room. When her oldest needed help with the down payment on a house, she loaned money from her own retirement fund. When they asked her to babysit, she said yes, even when her knees were aching and her body begged for rest. But something shifted last winter. Margaret slipped on some ice walking to her mailbox and fractured her hip. She was in the hospital for 4 days. Only one child visited, and just for an hour. The others were too busy, lying in that sterile hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines and white walls. Margaret faced something she had been avoiding for years. She'd poured herself dry, expecting one day someone might fill the cup back. But now, the cup was empty, and it was hers to refill. She didn't stop loving her children, but she began loving herself with the same energy she used to give everyone else. It started small. She said no when asked to watch the grandkids 2 days in a row. She didn't explain. She didn't apologize. She simply said, "I'm resting today," and she did. That small no was more than a refusal. It was a reclaiming. You see, one of the greatest myths we're told, especially as we age, is that kindness means always saying yes. But kindness without boundaries becomes something else entirely. It becomes exhaustion, resentment, even quiet bitterness. True respect doesn't come from overextending yourself. It comes from honoring yourself. When you begin to set gentle but clear boundaries, people may resist at first. They've gotten used to the version of you who always says yes, always rescues, always sacrifices. But in time, they'll come to recognize the deeper version, the one who still gives, but from a place of fullness, not depletion. This is not about becoming distant or cold. Quite the opposite. It's about cultivating the kind of inner warmth that radiates from someone who knows their worth, who isn't waiting for others to validate them, who doesn't need to prove love through exhaustion. Ryan, a soft-spoken man of 74, once shared something powerful in a community gathering. He said, "I used to say yes, so people would think I was useful. Now, I say yes only when it brings peace, not when it buys affection. That stayed with me, because sometimes the need to feel needed clouds the truth that you are already worthy. You don't have to earn your place in someone's life by constantly being available. You are not valuable only when you're helpful. Your presence is not a transaction. It is a gift. And when you stop over-sacrificing, something incredible happens. You make space for real connection, not one based on obligation or guilt, but one rooted in mutual respect. It's okay to say, I can't. It's okay to say, I don't feel up to it. It's okay to say, I'd rather not. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your rest, your peace, or your joy. You only owe it to yourself to make sure those things are no longer last on your list. There is quiet power in standing calmly in your truth. People may not respond the way you want right away. They might push back, question, or withdraw. But in time, your consistency becomes your clarity. Your inner stillness speaks louder than words. And this is where something starts to shift, not just within you, but in the way others respond. Because when you carry yourself with dignity, people begin to approach you differently, not with demands, but with appreciation, not with assumptions, but with care, not with guilt, but with grace. And it all starts not when you force them to change, but when you gently change how you show up in the room. Not smaller, not louder, but firmer, more whole, more you. When you begin to live this way, not shrinking, not striving, just calmly being, you'll notice a different kind of presence forming around you. Not because everyone suddenly starts calling more or changing overnight, but because you are no longer sitting in the same emotional chair. You've moved from waiting to choosing, from proving to simply being. And that shift, though invisible to the outside world at first, changes everything. Margaret, remember her, the one who fractured her hip and realized how alone she'd felt after giving so much. Something beautiful unfolded in the months that followed. Once she began saying no with quiet confidence, she also began saying yes to things she used to forget she loved. She returned to her old watercolors brush in hand, music in the background, sunlight pooling over the kitchen table. She laughed more often, and not at jokes on TV, but from inside herself, those deep, full-on, quiet laughs that come from a soul finally feeling light again. And here's what surprised her the most. Her middle child, Ethan, called one afternoon and said, "Mom, you sound different." She smiled. "Maybe I am." He paused, then truly asked how she was doing, not in the rushed, distracted way he used to, but in the way someone asks when they're ready to listen. That's the thing about presence. When you stop chasing, you start attracting, not through control, not through guilt, but through peace, because people are drawn to those who stand in their own light. Not because it demands attention, but because it radiates something grounding, something safe, something real. It doesn't mean everything becomes perfect. It doesn't mean every child calls every Sunday. But when they do, the conversation feels different. There's less of that tension, less fear that if you speak your mind, you'll push them away. Because now, your peace isn't rooted in their approval. It's rooted in your alignment. Jack, a soft-spoken widower, used to try so hard to be liked by his daughter's family. He bought gifts, showed up to every soccer game, even when his legs were tired and his hearing was fading. Still, they rarely invited him in for dinner. He'd stand on the porch after the game, watching them laugh inside without him, and he'd tell himself, "At least they know I care." But one day, something broke open in him, not out of anger, but sorrow. He realized he was living for breadcrumbs of connection and calling it love. That night, he made himself a real dinner, set the table, lit a candle, played a song from his youth. He told himself, "I'm not a background character in my own story." He didn't stop attending the games, but he stopped lingering on the porch. He stopped trying to be invited. He started making plans after walks in the park, quiet evenings with friends from the community center, journaling his memories for his grandchildren to read one day. And wouldn't you know, it took about a month. But one evening, after the game, his daughter walked over and asked, "You going home already?" He smiled and said, "Yes, I've got somewhere I'd like to be." She blinked. Something had changed. When you stop chasing people who don't see you, you give them a chance to realize what they're missing. That's not manipulation. That's truth. That's dignity. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You just have to speak from a place that's no longer asking for permission to exist. You see, so much of the pain we carry in later life doesn't come from age. It comes from unspoken longing. The longing to be cherished, to be remembered, to be included. But what if the first person to cherish you could be you? What if, instead of waiting to be remembered, you began to remember yourself, your joy, your stories, your dreams? Yes, even now. You're not too old to make someone smile, to start a small garden, to join a book club, to write letters, to share wisdom, to walk barefoot on the grass, to dance, even if it's just in the living room. There is no expiration date on meaning. Grace, a quiet woman in her 70s, started hosting a tea circle every Friday. Just her and 2 neighbors. No agenda, just tea, soft music, and space to share. They laughed, they cried, they swapped stories, and over time, something extraordinary happened. They all began to look forward to those Fridays, the way children look forward to summer mornings, not because of what they did, but because of how they felt. Seen, safe, alive. That's what happens when you choose to live instead of linger. When you make joy a daily practice, not something dependent on anyone else's behavior, but something you create right here with what you have. And what you have is more than enough. You don't need a crowd of admirers. You don't need your phone to buzz every hour. You just need your own presence to be enough again. So if you've ever looked out the window and felt that heavy silence, I want you to know this. You are still needed, but not just by others, by yourself, your spirit, your soul, your life, all still waiting to be claimed? Not by someone else, but by you. You are not forgotten. You are here. And when you live like you're here, not hiding, not shrinking, not hoping for scraps, that's when life begins to feel meaningful again. Not loud, not flashy, but deeply, quietly real. And that kind of meaning, no one can take away. Thank you for staying with me through this quiet journey. I know some of the feelings we've spoken about are not easy to name, let alone carry. It takes strength to admit when you feel invisible. It takes courage to start again, not with grand changes, but with small, meaningful steps toward yourself. If you've ever felt like your voice didn't matter anymore, I hope this moment reminds you that it still does. It always has. You've lived through so many seasons. You've loved, lost, rebuilt, given, waited. And now, perhaps more than ever, you deserve to feel grounded in your own worth. Not because someone else said so, but because you've earned every bit of it just by being here. You are not just someone's mother, someone's father, someone's grandparent. You are a full person with depth, with tenderness, with wisdom, and with light. And even if others haven't seen that lately, maybe today, you are starting to. There is something so quietly powerful about reclaiming your joy. Not as a reward, but as a birthright, drinking your morning tea with reverence, dressing up just for yourself, saying no without guilt, saying yes without apology, creating routines that nourish you not to impress, but to connect back with who you really are. If this message has stirred something inside you, even something small, a thought, a memory, a tug at the heart, I want to invite you to share it. Has your relationship with your adult children changed over the years? Have you ever gone through a season of feeling unseen? What helped you move forward, even when it felt like no one was reaching back? I would love to hear your story, truly. The comments below aren't just a space for responses. They're a room full of people, just like you, who are walking this quiet path of rediscovery and healing. Your words might be the light someone else needs to see tonight. And if this conversation has made you feel a little more seen, a little less alone, I'd be honored if we stayed connected. There's something deeply comforting about knowing that we don't have to figure everything out in one day, that we can walk through these changes together. If that sounds good to you, I'd love for you to click subscribe. That way, we can keep having these quiet, meaningful talks just like this one. Because I believe this with my whole heart. You matter. Not because of what you give, not because of who remembers, but but because you are here, breathing, learning, growing, still shining, even now, especially now. So tonight, when the house is quiet and the world feels far away, I hope you remember this. You are not forgotten, you are becoming. And this life, your life is still filled with meaning, waiting to be discovered in the softest of moments. Thank you for being here, for listening, for feeling, for simply being you. Until next time, take gentle care of yourself. You deserve nothing less.